Guys, my name is Ben. For those who don't know me, I just wanted to take a second to give God thanks for this opportunity to be able to just study and speak about His Word a little bit this morning, as well as thank God for this desire that He's put into your heart to want to study as well. Before we get started, I wanted to pause and just do a little exercise with you and think about what are you most worried about today. What are the worries that are really pressing on your heart the hardest? Are they things that you think that God has approves of, or do you think that God probably does not? How do you know when worry has gone too far? Well, if you had to guess, the passage that we're going to talk about today really covers worry and what to do about it. So the passage I'm going to read about is Mathew chapter 6, verse 31 through 34. So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the pagans run after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has trouble enough of its own. So this passage really taken right from the middle of the Sermon on the Mount that Jesus is giving to a bunch of Jews in Galilee. To kind of give a little bit of context for some of the things that you read in this passage. One, Jesus gives three main examples of things that the Jews of that time might be worried about. What are they going to eat? What are they going to drink? What are they going to wear? And so you might think, why did he use those three examples? Well, if you can imagine back then, today you might worry about those things, one or the other or all three at some point in the day. But back then, those three worries were a significant portion of, bare essential needs that took a lot more time and effort. Really to grow your own food or to obtain water or to create your own clothes took a significant portion of time and money. And so those were significant worries that really took up all the time back then. And so today, those are similar to worries that you might worry about in terms of school, in terms of career, or in terms of health, in terms of relationships. Another aspect of the passage I want to get a little bit of context towards is how he says in verse 32, for the pagans, or some translations for the Gentiles, run after all these things. So why did Jesus reference Gentiles or pagans in this passage? Well, remembering that he's speaking to Jews, the word Gentile, the word pagan, really would have elicited a strong response. Jews saw Gentiles as a people who were completely separate from God, completely cut off with no hope. And so they were physically and legally and spiritually separated from these groups of people. And oftentimes they would have to go through extensive rituals if they even just contacted or ate with one of them. And so that would have elicited a strong emotional response when Jesus used that word. So today it'd be kind of analogous to telling a Cowboys fan, hey, don't worry. That's what a Philadelphia Eagles fan would do. That's something that probably would elicit a strong response. And so talking about this passage, you really can probably break it down into really two commands and a promise. The first command, do not worry. Now, why do you think God would have said to not worry? Well, probably a couple of reasons, but I can think of three. Oftentimes when you start with a small, trivial worry, it really stems towards something bigger, and oftentimes these big worries are rooted in some kind of unbiblical lie. So take, for example, let's say you're worried about an upcoming test or how you're going to do it in this class. Are you worried because if you don't do well, your parents will say something, your parents may change their view about you, their relationship with you? Are you worried about your appearance in class? Are you worried about what your teacher will think or what your friends will think? Or are you worried more about your career? Are you worried about what this will do towards your trajectory or what you're expecting from life? If you really kind of trace it all back to some root issue, it's probably some unbiblical lie that we've been tricked into believing. And so when you dwell with worries, you stay in the small area and you stop and you don't really see where the worry ends up into an unbiblical lie. Another reason is that worries often make God's voice quieter and the world's voice louder. And so it's harder to discern what God is saying in your life, and it's harder to hear his comforting tone, his comforting words when you dwell in these worries. Finally, worry oftentimes prevents us from action because of keeping us in fear. Some particular worries may spur you into action. For example, if you have a test that's coming up, you're worried about how you're going to do, you might study, you might do the test, and then that worry is gone. But oftentimes Jesus is speaking more towards those big systemic worries that we can't often control, we can't do anything about. And so those worries often tell us that those are parts of our life that we're holding on to, that we're not willing to commit to God. And so that means we're not committing our whole lives, our whole selves to God. Now, of course, saying all these things is easy enough, but nobody wants to worry. And so if it was an easy fix, we would have fixed it. So what God's solution is telling us is really that we need to seek first the kingdom. And so before we prioritize any of these things in our life, the kingdom needs to be first. That probably means more than just spending a little bit more time reading or fitting Bible time into our morning routine. Really means reorienting our entire life and our priority and our purpose towards Christ. Another aspect of that is seeking righteousness. And so if you remember from the armor of God, that the righteousness acts as a breastplate. So it protects our heart. It protects our vitality from the things of this world. And so when you pursue things like purity or things like graciousness or things like discipline, that aligns our heart more with God and less of the world. And so we stop worrying about things that the world is worrying about because we're more worried about what God is looking at. And so finally, when he says that you do these two commands, the promise is that all these things will be given unto you. Now that might be misinterpreted as that means that any desire, any need that you have will be given. That's more talking to the prosperity gospel, which is really not a gospel at all. This is really speaking that if you seek the kingdom first, everything that's related to that seeking, everything related to that purpose, that ministry, God will provide. And that is the promise that he is going to stand behind. And so another verse that really speaks to that is Romans 8:28. As we know that all things work together for the good of those who love God. So who decides what is good? God does. Finally, to close, I think the worries really speak towards where our priorities are. So this passage really says that the mark of a non-believer is somebody who worries about the problems and then tries to go in between problems of this world. So if you ask yourself about that worry that you thought about initially, would you still be worried about it if you knew that the worries, the struggles, and even if this life itself were temporary? Would you still worry about it? And if so, God says that you need to seek the kingdom first and commit those things to God in prayer. So I hope that these words were a blessing to you, and I hope that through this Lenten time, you're able to kind of commune with God and spend more time and become closer to him and learn a little bit more about who he is. Just want to thank you for your time.